Chapter 11. The Story of Ananta. Sutta Goswami said, after hearing the prayers of the kings, who were all his devotees, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kalki, spoke to them about the duties of the four Varnas: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. The Lord described the duties prescribed by the scriptures for all classes of men, whether they be attached householders or detached renunciates. By hearing the talks of Lord Kalki, the hearts of the kings became purified. They bowed down before him once more and then inquired about their actual identities. They said, why do human beings have male and female bodies? What is the reason for this? Why do our bodies change from childhood to boyhood and then to old age? And why are we subject to happiness and distress? O Lord, please explain all this. Apart from these things, we would also like to hear about anything else. Lord Kalki then invoked the great sage Ananta. As soon as the Lord remembered the pure-hearted ascetic, who observed very formidable vows, he immediately arrived there, thinking that he would be delivered by Lord Kalki's darshan. He said, my dear Lord, please order me. What shall I do in your service? Lord Kalki smiled and said, you know everything about me and my pastimes. Destiny cannot be changed. Without an action, there cannot be a reaction. Upon hearing these enigmatic words of Lord Kalki, the sage felt great satisfaction. When the lotus-eyed Lord Kalki prepared to depart, the kings were astonished and spoke as follows. The king said, what did this great sage tell you? What did you say to him in reply? What had you two discussed previously? We are very eager to hear about this. To the king's inquiry, Lord Kalki replied, if you would like to know about what transpired between us, then just ask this peaceful and sober sage. Being advised by Lord Kalki in this way, the assembled kings offered their obeisances to the great sage, Ananta, and then inquired from him as follows. The kings said, O exalted sage, Lord Kalki is the protector of religious principles, and your conversation with him must have been very confidential. We have an ardent desire to hear what you had said to him, and so please oblige us. The great sage Ananta said, long ago, there lived a sage named Vidruma in the city of Purika. He was well versed in Vedic literature, very highly qualified, and helpful to others. I am his only son. My mother Soma was a very chaste wife. I was born when my parents were quite old, and I was a eunuch. My parents were very sad to see that I was a eunuch, and everyone began to gossip and criticize me. Finally, my father became so distraught that he left home and went to a forest of Lord Shiva, where he prayed to the husband of Parvati after worshipping him with offerings of incense, a ghee lamp, and sandalwood paste. Vidruma said, I offer my obeisances to Mahadev, who awards benedictions, is very peaceful, the only real shelter for everyone, and is the master of the universe. He is decorated with a necklace of Vasuki. He holds the Ganga in his matted hair, and he bestows transcendental happiness upon his devotees. Being prayed to like this, Mahadev became very pleased with my father. While riding upon the back of his bull carrier, he appeared before my father and smilingly said, "You can ask me for any benediction you desire." My father said, "I have begotten a son who is a eunuch, and so my heart is filled with distress." To this, the husband of Parvati, who was standing by his side, gave my father the benediction that I would become a handsome and virile man. After receiving this benediction, my father returned home and found that I had become an attractive male. As a result, the happiness of my parents knew no bounds. In due course of time, I grew up and became 12 years old. At that time, my elderly parents arranged for my marriage and then celebrated it with great pomp, along with their friends and relatives. I was married to the daughter of Yajnaratha. She was exquisitely beautiful, being in the prime of her youth. I was very much attached to my household life, and soon I became a hen-pecked husband. Soon after my marriage, my father and mother left this world. I dutifully performed the required funeral rites and other rituals in the association of my well-wishers and some qualified brahmanas. According to my capacity, I fed many qualified brahmins. And thereafter, being afflicted by intense separation from my parents, I devoted my time to the worship of the Supreme Lord. Soon, Lord Hari became very pleased with me and appeared in my dreams. He said, "All the perfections and attachments that you see in this world are simply displays of my energy, Maya. Those who are bewildered by such illusory displays think, 'He is my father, she is my mother,' and so on, and thus suffer terrible distress, fear, and anxiety." After hearing these words of wisdom spoken by Lord Hari, I was about to put up some kind of argument, but then the Lord suddenly disappeared from my dream, and I woke up with a start. I was greatly astonished and immediately left my city, Purika. I went to Purushottam Kshetra, the transcendental abode of Lord Hari, along with my wife. There, by the right side of the Lord's temple, I built my ashram and began to serve him, along with my wife and followers. While residing in the abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I developed a desire to see his illusory energy, Maya. So I began to meditate on the Lord, while dancing, chanting, and singing his glories. In this way, 12 years passed. Then once, before breaking my fast, I, along with my associates, went to bathe in the sea. As I entered the water to bathe, I suddenly lost my balance and was towed under by the current, so that I was convinced that I was about to die. In fact, some fish or crab began to nibble at me. At times, I was submerged within the water, and at other times, I floated on the surface. My heart was very restless and frightened. Gradually, by the pushing of the waves, I lost consciousness and my body became numb. Thereafter, being driven by the wind, I was washed onto the beach unconscious somewhere in the south. At that time, an elderly Brahmin named Sharma saw me lying in the sand. He took compassion upon me, and so, after completing his worship of the Lord, he brought me back to his house. This pious and wealthy Brahmin resided with his wife and children, and he took care of me, treating me like a son. I could not understand anything about where I was, how I had come there, and so on. And so I felt very aggrieved, but continued to live at the elderly Brahmin's house, considering him as my father and his wife as my mother. Realizing that I had been initiated as a member of the Twice-Born Society, Sharma gave his daughter, Charumati, to me in marriage. This girl was very beautiful, with a complexion like molten gold, and she was a reservoir of good qualities, and very cultured. Having received a glorious wife like that, I could not trust that my good fortune would last. Charumati always endeavored to please me. I lived with her in great happiness and eventually begot 5 sons. I became merged into an ocean of joy. The names of my 5 sons were Jaya, Vijay, Kamal, Vimala, and Buddha. Just as the king of the demigods is worshipped in the heavenly planets by all the other demigods, just as the king of the demigods is worshipped in the heavenly planets by all the other demigods, I was respected by my children, friends, relatives, well-wishers, and others. Soon, my fame spread everywhere. In due course of time, I decided that my eldest son, Buddha, should get married. There was a Brahmin named Dharamshar who agreed to give his daughter to my son in marriage. On an auspicious day, he invited qualified Brahmins and performed all the necessary rituals. Many beautiful women who were dressed very gorgeously and decorated with golden ornaments danced joyfully. The whole atmosphere became filled with the sweet sounds of musical instruments. For the welfare of my son, I went to the shore of the ocean and offered oblations to the forefathers, demigods, and great sages. After completing that ritual, as I prepared to depart, I suddenly spotted my previous friends and relatives who had resided with me at Purushottam Kshetra. I was very surprised to see them. To my surprise, I found myself to be the same handsome young man that had bathed in the sea on a Dwadashi long ago. When my friends of Purushottam Kshetra saw me, they were concerned and said, "O Ananta, why do you look so anxious? You are a great Vaishnav. Have you seen something wonderful, either in the sea or on the land? If you have seen something amazing, then please tell us. Now you can break your Ekadashi vow." To this, I replied, "My dear friends, I have not seen or heard anything wonderful at all. I actually had become overwhelmed by lust, and thus had lost my vitality. At that time, I desired to see Lord Hari's energy. Then, by the influence of Maya, I forgot everything about myself and took up a new life that was full of lusty desires. Now, I am that same young man once again. Due to intense material affection and the influence of illusion, I was unable to understand my actual position. Actually, I could not understand how much I had forgotten my actual self. However, nobody else realized that I had become bewildered by the Lord's energy, Maya. My mind was simply absorbed in the thoughts of my children, wife, and wealth. As a result, I felt great distress and lamentation. I even forgot that I was Ananta. The events of my life at Purushottam Kshetra appeared to me like no more than a dream. But now I am that young man once again. When my proud wife saw me in that almost senseless condition, she lamented, "Alas, what has happened?" Then she began to cry out loud. As I gazed upon my wife that I had lived with at Purushottam Kshetra, I immediately remembered everything about my wife, children, wealth, and so on. At this, my mind became perplexed and morose, confusing Maya and Lord Hari. Suddenly, a swan-like personality came before me and began to pacify me with proper reasoning. He was sober by nature, the knower of everything, fully satisfied, and absorbed in the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. His effulgence was like that of the sun. He was situated in the mode of unalloyed goodness, and he was peaceful and pure-hearted. Indeed, the very sight of him could destroy the sufferings of all living entities. My relatives faithfully worshipped that Paramahams and then inquired from him about my welfare. Thus ends the translation of the 11th chapter of Shri Kalki Puran. Shri Radha.